What did you think of Obama's comments on the campaign trail that black men should get over their reluctance to vote for Kamala? Will that be effective? Yeah, he was pretty scoldy.
Wall Street Journal and the New York Times poll most recently has overall black support for Trump over 20%, by the way. I think it might have been as high as...
That's just men.
Trump is making inroads with that demographic, voting-wise.
He oddly does better each time with immigrants, minority groups, people of color, the people who you
maybe it's not so odd.
That's conservative political commentator Buck Sexton attempting to help Bill Maher cure his Trump derangement syndrome by acknowledging some simple truths about his growing appeal with male voters. Welcome to Nerk News, I'm Nerkish, and with less than a week away from the election, it appears that Harris and Walz have not figured out a way to appeal to men. In retrospect, it might not have been a good idea to run a vibes campaign focused on reproductive health care for childless cat ladies.
Like, I read this op-ed in the New York Times this week for the people who say, oh, Bill, you just pick on the fringe. I don't just pick on the fringe. This is the New York Times.
This is central.
Well, I mean, this book called Boy Mom, I've never heard of the author, Ruth Whitman. Okay, reimagining boyhood in the age of impossible masculinity. First, she goes after Tim Walz because he uses sports metaphors and gun references. Okay, then listen to this. She's talking about being pregnant. I was frightened, she says, both for and of the tiny piece of patriarchy growing inside me.
Yes.
Formerly known as a baby.
Yes. This is why Democrats have a gender problem.
I'm just trying to be a little even here.
Yes.
Say, I mean, it's not that this stuff does not exist on that side. And my contention always here is that at some point Trump will go away. Trumpism will not, until they're not afraid of this kind of stuff.
Well, I think
a tiny piece of patriarchy growing inside of me.
You know, this is the main problem here. Grievance groups will never go away once you create them. It doesn't matter if they were formed for legitimate reasons or not. Once established, they'll find reasons to keep gathering more and more resources and power to justify their existence. It's why all of this stuff seems to be getting worse and worse, and you're hearing women now refer to their own children like what Bill Maher just stated. Despite them not only achieving equality, but excelling ahead of men in many areas now.
You know, female earnings relative to men, female college graduation relative to men, women have made all this tremendous progress. And now we're in this society where, you know, very few men tend to have a lot of options when it comes to mates, and a lot of guys, they're not going to start the next billion-dollar company, and they're wondering, you know, what's in it for me? And then when they're told, oh, yeah, by the way, like, we're putting immigrants up in 4-star hotels in New York City who just got here yesterday. Sorry that you can't pay your bills.
Buck,
okay. No, but I'm just speaking to what the reality is.
I'm so sorry that men have had to now endure the same inequities that women have. I mean, the idea that there is, but think about this, what you're saying is...
This is why Kamala's going to lose, by the way. This is why Kamala will lose.
Well, why? Because an articulate woman made a point?
No, because you, instead of addressing that men can have concerns that should be spoken to politically, especially working class men who are feeling the pinch right now economically, you know, the media on the coast, and look, I'm a part of it. I grew up in New York City. I grew up in Manhattan. I understand. Just kind of mocks these people as though they don't count. And Donald Trump speaks to them and for them, whether he's of them or not, does not matter.
Buck, first of all, when people are talking about masculinity, I do think the way it's being described is not the discussion you're having about gender in sports and gender identity, but instead the idea of how I think white men, and you've talked about this on your show and others, feel as though they are disenfranchised and being left behind by either the progress that women are making or otherism or the browning of America, because there is the notion that they are entitled to be in a certain position they're no longer in. But the reality is progress works such that everyone must go in the direction of it. And so if some people are being left behind in part because society is making equity more of a position that we favor, then that is a reflection of where we ought to be going.
What that DreamWorks character from CNN just said probably revealed a bit more than she intended it to. I mean, she was making light of the fact that young men who had nothing to do with the historical inequity that the left complains about are falling behind and suffering in an age of DEI initiatives. This basically reveals reveals that liberals like her don't just want equality with opportunity, they want it with perceived historical injustices too, which means certain groups have to suffer now to make everything fair in their eyes. It inevitably boils down to petty retribution and revenge with them. It's why there are dozens upon dozens of articles openly crapping on people from certain identity groups that they think deserve punishment, and why they get upset when members of those groups have finally had enough and form a voting bloc based on shared interests, which, by the way, is something the left champions and does all of the time, yet is now decrying and calling men selfish for doing. Thankfully, though, it looks like this grift is starting to slow down and the tide is turning. But let me know what you think. Are these groups being left behind in the name of progress, or purposely ignored to further a political agenda? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. That stuff really does help us out. Until then, this has been Nerk News. Thanks for watching. Bye!